Viewer discretion is advised.
The worst logo in NFL history. What looks like the precursor to putting heads in formaldehyde jars, Futurama style, the 1960 Oakland Raiders decapitated a one-eyed football player and placed his cabeza inside a glass egg, then stabbed him twice with swords as a warning to all. Do not sit in the lower seating area in Oakland if you are a fan of an opposing team. No wonder they ghosted to Vegas. Yes, right into the top slot. I have been salivating over this stadium ever since I saw the first rendering. It has it all. A large translucent roof and movable side windows, an all-natural grass field, and it's in freaking Vegas. You can't really beat that as far as an outside environment. And as far as atmosphere inside, surely there are probably no fans this year, but when it opens there will be a new, less violent black hole, and who wouldn't want to drag their hungover selves to a game and watch the Raiders play basically anyone, even if it's not your team? This stadium checks off all the boxes, and too bad it'll be quite some time before any of us get to see it. So many options. We could pick Art Shell, who went 2-14 and blamed Adam Schefter for reporting that his job was in jeopardy, or Lane Kiffin, who was younger than most of his players and whose only achievement was keeping Jamarcus Russell off the field. But the worst was Dennis Allen, who had a year of Carson Palmer, another of Derek Carr, and still couldn't do better than 10-38 in 3 tries.
Let's start in Oakland, the home of the greatest football collapse in NFL history. Here's what this 5-year stretch has over the others. It immediately followed a trip to the Super Bowl. That's right, the Raiders won just 19 games from 2003 to 2007. The 3 years before that, they won 11, 10, and 12 games, respectively. The Tampa Bay Buccaneers didn't just beat the Raiders in Super Bowl 37, they broke them down like cardboard Amazon boxes. So how did an AFC juggernaut become a doormat so quickly? Well, they traded John Gruden after the 2001 season, and while Bill Callahan was able to coast on Gruden's roster for a year, he hit the wall when his veteran stars lost their juice. Rich Gannon, the MVP in 2002, was injured and started just 7 games in 2003. Jerry Rice and Tim Brown both hit the wall, and a chronic knee injury ended Rod Woodson's career. Ultimately, it's fair to wonder if the Raiders have ever recovered from the Super Bowl loss to the Bucs. They've made the playoffs just once, had one winning season, and rehired Gruden in an attempt to recapture the magic. How's that going so far?
For a team with such an awful 20-year stretch, their largest home defeat is only 38 points. The embarrassing part of this game, however, was that the defeat came at the hands of the Jets, who were quarterbacked by Mark Sanchez. Sanchez combined for 2 touchdowns before enjoying a hot dog on the bench in front of the black hole. Mark Sanchez was taken out to rest. Just what the hell was last season? John Gruden fired for being a racist POS, Henry Ruggs for being an actual POS, and Damon Arnett for being an even bigger POS. Oh, you hired Josh McDaniels? Just wait until he leaves you drier than Lake Mead. When it happens, we'll all say we told you so. Alex Leatherwood really panned out, eh? And never forget, if John Gruden didn't understand that emails were forever, he'd still be your coach for the next 7 years. Allegiant Stadium, Paradise City, Nevada. Las Vegas is one of the most efficient cities in the world, from their water usage to how they separate you from your money at the slot machines. So when they needed to come up with $750 million to entice the Raiders to come to the desert, they decided to make the out-of-towners pay for it. By increasing their hotel and hospitality taxes, Las Vegas found another way to sucker their tourists. Damn, son. Rich Bisaccia, Raiders,
2021. Now, you may be shocked that Rich Bisaccia is not the #1 entry on this list, but that's because the best interim is a rather sneaky one. That's called foreshadowing, folks. Bisaccia is the first coach on this list who did a great job, but wasn't hired on by the team. The 2021 Raiders can only be described as an absolute shit show. After a Week 5 loss, John Gruden was essentially forced to resign despite his team being 3-2 at the time. The reason? His and only his emails were leaked during a congressional probing of the Washington Commanders, and messages he made while he was with ESPN were made public. Okay, cool, the Raiders are left without a coach, so they made the bold move to elevate Rich Bisaccia, who was only the special teams coordinator at the time, to head coach. And he started out fire, winning his first 2 games before the shit started hitting the fan. Henry Ruggs, Damon Arnett, injuries, the Raiders would lose 5 of 6 and seemed all but dead. But then Bisaccia rallied his troops. The team won 4 straight and finished 10-7, making the playoffs, eventually losing to the AFC champ Bengals in a close game that featured a questionable call. So how did the Raiders reward Bisaccia? By not hiring him and instead bringing in Josh McDaniels, who used to be a man.
I was a man, yes.
Bisaccia is the only interim coach in league history to coach an NFL playoff game during the Super Bowl era.
Jimmy Garoppolo. Jimmy Garoppolo might be the most handsome, but he isn't a top-paid quarterback in the league. After receiving a 3-year deal worth $72.5 million from the Raiders, he's just the 17th highest-paid signal caller, proving that for once, looks don't matter. It's not that Garoppolo isn't experienced or even accomplished, it's that he needs to be sending a massive gift basket to Kyle Shanahan for helping him earn that overpriced deal. Oh, and don't expect a similar result after the Josh McDaniels experience in Vegas. Garoppolo goes from the most quarterback-friendly situation to an environment where quarterbacks are treated like second-class citizens, literally. Shanahan created a situation where Garoppolo could rely on a potent running game and find quick, schemed open receivers that made a quarterback's life very easy. And even then, he was still outplayed by literally the last guy picked in the draft. Since the start of 2018, when Garoppolo became the starter in San Francisco, he's played just 50 out of a possible 85 regular season games. And sure, the one season he played every game, the 49ers made it to the Super Bowl. But Shanahan tried to desperately hide Garoppolo in that postseason, and it worked until they got in a dogfight with the Chiefs and Jimmy G threw 3 picks, including one with his eyes shut. Now, he only sees dollar signs, but Garoppolo's deal, modest as it is a big overpay for an aging quarterback that doesn't come with the head coach that made him effective. He still is handsome. Allegiant was ranked #1 on my list last time, however it's gone down a few pegs since. I still love the outside architecture and transparent roof, and from an aesthetic and engineering standpoint, the stadium is perfect. However, Tom has some pretty strong thoughts.
I don't think you would like it because
Really?
the same reasons you don't like MetLife. You walk into Allegiant Stadium, you have no idea the Raiders play there. The ways that you find that out is if you are on like the really, really nice like concourses, like the ones that like you pay, like the Champions Club, like that's filled with Raiders stuff. There's no Raiders banners. There's no Raider, like there's the pro shop and stuff. They're all black, like the seats are all black. They have like bars and stuff like that. And like you said, modernity, it's beautiful. Like aesthetically, it's really, really nice. But it doesn't look like the Raiders play there. The way that I feel about it is just like, it's a space. Like, it feels like it doesn't really have a soul, to be honest with you. Like, they had to put on the video boards during the game because the fans were so unfamiliar with football to be quiet while the Raiders were on offense. Like, that's what it is. Like, again, as a stadium, it's beautiful. As like holding the tradition of the Raiders, I think it fails.
Wow, that's pretty rough. Maybe they should use the giant torch as a crematorium for former Raiders, and that can make it less of an impersonable vibe.
With Josh backing out, we were disappointed. Unquestionably, we were disappointed and surprised.
The old assistants, though, as Belichick still searches for McDaniels.
This also tells me Josh McDaniels is still the snake that everybody thought he was.
All we're trying to do is win him.
On February 6, 2018, Patriots offensive coordinator Josh McDaniels agreed to become the head coach of the Indianapolis Colts. The team announced the hiring, and an introductory press conference was scheduled to take place in Lucas Oil Stadium. The next day, McDaniels called Colts GM Chris Ballard. He went back on his word. He would not become the Colts head coach. As news of McDaniels' backtracking became public, one word kept coming up: snake. Anyone who remembered Josh McDaniels' time with the Denver Broncos was quick to point out that this was not a one-off. This was who Josh McDaniels was as a coach and a person. Are the Raiders getting a coach who sabotaged the Denver Broncos in 2009? Are they getting a changed man to lead their franchise? Or perhaps they're getting what everyone has seen. This is the story of the NFL's biggest snake.
My father was a head football coach, high school football coach. He's a legend in Ohio. He didn't like me to say that, but I would be remiss if I didn't talk about that.
Joshua Thomas McDaniels was born in 1976 in Barberton, Ohio, just a 30-minute drive from the Pro Football Hall of Fame. His dad, Tom McDaniels, was a high school football coach in Ohio, a legendary one at that. Coach McDaniels brought Josh to practices at McKinley High School in Canton. From the age of 5, Josh slept with a football, watching his dad coach every day, knowing one day that would be his life. By the time he was in high school, McDaniels hardly cut the figure of a star athlete. Standing 5'8", 155 pounds, he was far from a prototype passer. But McDaniels commanded respect in McKinley's huddle as their starting quarterback and place kicker. As the Bulldogs QB, there was only one objective: beat rival Massillon. On November 5th, 1994, 20,000 fans packed the stadium to see one of the fiercest rivalries in high school football. Sports Illustrated writers attended the game. It was a back-and-forth affair, knotted up 35-all and headed to overtime. McDaniels marched his team down the field and into the end zone. McKinley took the lead. Now lining up to kick the extra point, McDaniels tugged at his right shoe, swung his leg, and missed. Massillon answered with a touchdown drive of their own, and their kicker sent the game-winning field goal right down the pipe. In mere seconds, McDaniels had gone from hero to GOAT, but he took the failure in stride. Later in the same season, McKinley reached the playoffs and met Massillon once again, the 101st game in the series. This time it was the Bulldogs who pulled away in the final minutes. With his team down 1 point in the fourth quarter, McDaniels tossed a 46-yard touchdown to Mark Thews. McKinley won, and 15 years later, McDaniels would hire Thews as a head coach in Denver. After a collegiate career as a backup QB at John Carroll University, Josh McDaniels capitalized on a connection between his father and Nick Saban to land a gig as a graduate assistant for the Michigan State Spartans in 1999. 2 years later, McDaniels got a call from the New England Patriots. It was Bill Belichick offering him a job as a low-level scout for the Pats, a team fresh off a 5-11 season. I'm sure the call went like this: "Hey Josh, would you like to coach for the New England Patriots?" As the Patriots evolved from lovable underdogs into a full-fledged dynasty, McDaniels quickly worked his way up the totem pole in Foxborough. Scout, offensive assistant, then quarterbacks coach. Finally, when Charlie Weiss left, McDaniels filled his shoes as offensive coordinator, but not his shirt. He would be calling plays for Tom Brady. It wasn't until 2007 that McDaniels had mastered his own playbook. That year, the Patriots offense scored an NFL record 589 points. Tom Brady and Randy Moss set single-season touchdown records. New England won 18 games in a row to start the season. How did that end, though? 2007 was one thing, but it was the next season that proved McDaniels' true showcase as an up-and-coming offensive mind. Tom Brady blew out his knee in week 1, ushering in Matt Castle, who hadn't started a game at quarterback since 2000, when he was a senior in high school. None of that mattered. McDaniels guided Castle to a 10-5 record under center, throwing for nearly 3,700 yards and 21 touchdowns. The Patriots missed the playoffs despite winning 11 games, but that free time in January gave McDaniels a head start for interviews, this time as a head coach. His rise to the big time had begun.
You know, when I went to Denver, you know, I knew a little bit of football. I didn't really know people.
In February of 2009, Broncos tight end Nate Jackson sat down in Josh McDaniels' office. Jackson had been in Denver since 2003, McDaniels just 1 month. The head coach was just 3 years older than his tight end. McDaniels talks about his philosophy and his plans for the team, but he doesn't make eye contact with Jackson. He doesn't laugh at his jokes either. A few weeks later, Jackson received a voicemail at his parents' house. The Broncos had cut him. Jackson phoned McDaniels' office, but the coach was busy in a meeting. He would call him back, McDaniels' secretary told him. Nate Jackson never received a phone call from Josh McDaniels. After 7 years in Denver, Jackson was ghosted. 13 years later, Josh McDaniels acknowledged that he knew football when he got to Denver, but he didn't know people. That may have been an understatement. After a 3-game skid to end the 2008 season, the Broncos parted ways with head coach Mike Shanahan, the 2-time Super Bowl champion, who had been the head man in Denver since Josh McDaniels had been a senior in high school. Shanahan's successor was 2 decades younger. Like they had done with Shanahan in 1995, the Broncos gave McDaniels full control of personnel, and he wielded that power immediately. McDaniels inherited a 26-year-old Pro Bowler at quarterback. This was not the Jay Cutler as we know him today. Don't care. This was an ascending star at the most valuable position in sports. Cutler possessed immense talent, and he knew it, once remarking that he had a stronger arm than John Elway. His new head coach was equally cocksure in his abilities. It was clear that the two would butt heads right off the bat. On the first day of free agency, an unlikely team lit a powder keg. The Tampa Bay Buccaneers proposed a 3-way trade between them, the New England Patriots, and the Denver Broncos. It went like this. New England would receive a 2nd-round pick from the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, the Broncos receive Matt Castle, and the Buccaneers would receive Jay Cutler. Castle's agent leaked the trade talks and Cutler caught wind of the negotiations. The Broncos denied the rumors, but Cutler was still hurt, angry even. This prompted a phone call between Cutler and McDaniels in which the quarterback wanted a vote of confidence from his new head coach. Instead, Cutler heard these words from McDaniels. "Anyone can be traded at any time." When he said that he didn't know people, McDaniels meant that shit. He treated his franchise quarterback with the same respect as his reserve tight end, which is to say, no respect. The trade fell apart and Castle went to Kansas City, but that didn't salvage the relationship between Cutler and McDaniels. A trade was now inevitable. The only question was where. McDaniels and the Broncos landed on Chicago as their final trade partner. Why? Because the Bears were willing to give 2 first-round picks and the missing piece. Kyle Orton. Orton's first win as a Bronco was a miracle that nearly gave Gus Johnson a heart attack. The next 3 wins were defensive slugfests, but Orton had done his part, not throwing a single interception through the first quarter of the season. Meanwhile, in Chicago, Jay Cutler had thrown 4 interceptions in his Bears debut. Josh McDaniels was beginning to look like an authoritarian genius in the mold of his mentor. Good job, Josh. And that mentor was next up on the schedule. The Broncos and the Patriots battled it out in Week 5, with the Broncos erasing an early deficit. 2 Brandon Marshall touchdowns pushed the game to overtime. With the game on the line, Matt Prater kicked a 41-yard field goal. Broncos win. Bill Belichick took the field to shake McDaniels' hand, but the protege did not join the master at midfield. Instead, he was taking a victory lap, pumping his fist in front of the fans at Mile High. This would be the height of his coaching in Denver, and maybe his career. After starting 6-0, the Broncos dropped 4 straight. Not only were they beaten, but they were crushed, losing by a combined total of 90 points. The coach, who was pumping his fist after beating the Patriots, was now spending his Thanksgiving screaming at his team on national television.
All we're trying to do is win a motherfucking game!
The first 2 teams to beat the 2009 Broncos had laid a blueprint for the rest of the NFL. The Ravens and the Steelers had uncovered a very simple truth. Get to Orton, and he would fold like a beach chair. McDaniels' prize quarterback was a pure pocket passer with no recourse for when a play broke down. The team also lacked depth. Furthermore, McDaniels failed to adapt veteran players to his scheme, or better yet, he failed to adapt his scheme to veteran players. Tight end Tony Scheffler, a mismatch nightmare for defenses, got phased out of the offense. Wide receiver Brandon Stokely became an afterthought and was replaced by former Patriot Jabbar Gaffney. Eddie Royal, who had caught 91 passes as a rookie in 2008, caught just 37 in McDaniels' offense. Then there was Peyton Hillis, who was later a Madden cover athlete with the Browns. Under Mike Shanahan, Hillis was a revelation in 2008, rushing for 5 yards per carry. With McDaniels, Hillis got the ball just 13 times? How could that be? According to rumors in the deepest corners of the internet, Hillis attempted to put the moves on a woman in the Denver area who just so happened to be Laura McDaniels. Yeah, Josh McDaniels' wife. It's unclear whether or not Hillis even knew who he was hitting on, but it allegedly cost him a ton of carries in Denver, and eventually got him traded to Cleveland in exchange for Brady Quinn. Whatever it was just another sign of Denver's dysfunction. Altogether, the Broncos were a fraudulent squad just waiting for the other shoe to drop, and it did. The Broncos embarked on 2 separate 4-game losing streaks in 2009. After starting 6-0, they finished 8-8. Denver still had an outside shot to the postseason if they could beat the Chiefs at Mile High in Week 17. But McDaniels decided to sabotage his team in a new way. The Broncos' best offensive weapon, Brandon Marshall, was late to a training session to work on his hamstring. McDaniels caught wind of the infraction and benched his star wide receiver in a do-or-die game. The head coach also got word that Tony Scheffler was complaining about his usage in the new offense. He too was benched by McDaniels in Week 17. In the game itself, the Broncos hung around late, but like their season at large, collapsed down the stretch. Denver became just the 3rd team since 1970 to start 6-0 and miss the playoffs. A year later, they were headed for even more embarrassment.
I've been selective, maybe to a fault sometimes. People wanted me to do things a little earlier than maybe I did them, but it was going to take a special place for me to really leave where I was.
The next time the Broncos met the Chiefs, Denver was just 2-6. Kansas City was 5-3. That Sunday, it didn't matter. The Broncos returned the favor from a season ago and defeated KC by 20 points. As the game ended, Josh McDaniels jogged out to midfield to shake the hand of Chiefs head coach Todd Haley. Todd Haley was referring to an incident 2 weeks before, an incident that took place all the way across the pond in London, England. Saturday, October 30th, 2010. It's a day before Halloween in London, England, and the San Francisco 49ers are holding a walkthrough in Wembley Stadium. In 24 hours, they'll play the Broncos in front of a raucous crowd of costume-wearing Brits. But there's someone already watching from above, and he's standing behind a camera. Looking down at the 49ers through the aperture is Steve Scarnecchia, the son of legendary Patriots offensive line coach Dante Scarnecchia. The younger Scarnecchia had been in New England for the first 3 Super Bowl wins by Bill Belichick and Tom Brady. It was him taping opposing teams' walkthroughs in a scandal that was later dubbed Spygate 2. Denver had the 49ers signals on tape. In theory, they may have known what plays were coming. The Broncos still lost 24-16. According to an NFL investigation, Scarnecchia had taped a 6-minute video of the walkthrough and presented the tape to McDaniels that same day. According to McDaniels, he did not look at the tape. Regardless, McDaniels waited a full 9 days to notify Broncos executives, who quickly reported the violation to the NFL. Denver quickly fired Scarnecchia, and the NFL handed down fines of $50,000 to both the Broncos and to McDaniels personally. It was the biggest embarrassment in a series of compounding embarrassments. 8 days after being penalized by the NFL, the Broncos fired Josh McDaniels after a 4-point loss to, who else? The Kansas City Chiefs. He finished his Denver career with a record of 11-17, including 17 losses in the last 22 games. As for Haley and McDaniels, they hugged at midfield. Let the darkness begin. It took Josh McDaniels another 7 years to get a job as an NFL head coach. One of those 7 years was spent as an offensive coordinator in St. Louis, where he called plays for a Rams offense that scored 12 points per game. Those other 6 years were spent back in New England, where McDaniels helped the Patriots win 2 more Super Bowls. Then the phone rang. It was the Indianapolis Colts. They wanted to hire Josh McDaniels to fill their head coaching vacancy left by Chuck Pagano. After a successful interview, the Colts extended the offer, and McDaniels said yes. They even announced a press conference at Lucas Oil Stadium. McDaniels even had a suit picked out for the occasion. Then, something happened.
With Josh backing out, we were disappointed. Unquestionably, we were disappointed and surprised. We'd agreed to contract terms. We had an agreement in place. We followed all the rules, did everything right.
The evening before he was set to be introduced to the media, McDaniels backed out of his verbal agreement with the Colts. Instead, he was going back to New England to resume his position as offensive coordinator. There were a couple reasons why McDaniels got cold feet, at least as far as we know. First, McDaniels became uncomfortable with how football operations were run in Indy, the logistical side of the job. Ultimately, McDaniels and Colts general manager Chris Ballard struggled to come up with a workable solution to delegating responsibilities. Then, of course, there was the rumor that Patriots owner Robert Kraft had come to McDaniels at the last minute, convincing him to stay in Foxborough and become their heir to Bill Belichick. According to reports, Belichick had also offered to include McDaniels in roster decisions and involved him in the inner workings of the New England Patriots organization. Not to mention, there was a bit of a raise too, an assurance that McDaniels' children could attend the same schools for the next few years. After McDaniels broke the news to Chris Ballard that he was out, Ballard was pissed and blindsided. In his anger, the Colts GM went out and hired Frank Reich, the Eagles offensive coordinator who had just defeated McDaniels' Patriots in the Super Bowl just a few days earlier. McDaniels didn't just catch heat from the outside, it also came from his inner circle. His longtime agent, Bob Lamont, dropped McDaniels as a client. According to Lamont, McDaniels was committing professional suicide. It turns out that was wrong.
A wise man once told me that when you're young, you try to accumulate and advance, and when you get older, you figure out that it's a lot more about serving and impacting others, and I think I've gone through both phases.
During the 2011 lockout, Josh McDaniels had plenty of time to spend by himself. McDaniels was in St. Louis, his players weren't allowed at team facilities, and his wife and kids were still in Colorado, finishing out the school year. Only a couple months had passed since the Broncos let him go. The first person Josh McDaniels called after he lost his job in Denver was his father, Tom. His dad gave him one piece of advice: write down everything you would do differently if you got another chance to be a head coach. Josh took the advice and started an Excel document titled Lessons Learned. He gathered reflections from his own experience, from his father, even from his former rival, Tony Dungy. There are hundreds of lessons on that Excel sheet, but here are some of the big ones. Be patient, not impulsive, with decisions. That one he picked up from the Jay Cutler trade. Clean up your language. All we're trying to do is win a mother bleeping game. Wouldn't have made for a famous soundbite. Listen to others. Maybe Tony Scheffler, Eddie Royal, and Brandon Stokely knew something he didn't. My way or the highway got McDaniels shipped out of town. Josh McDaniels will get a chance to put those lessons to work in Las Vegas, where he was hired as the head coach in January of 2022. Redemption
is hard to come by in football. McDaniels earned redemption in high school when he beat the Massillon Tigers. He'll have the chance to do it again. He'll also have Devontae Adams. Who knows whether he'll work out in Las Vegas, however a time-honored fable may give us some insight. When a young woman once found a snake near death and brought it into her home, she nursed it back to health. Once healthy again, the snake bit her. When she asked why, the snake only said one thing. When you brought me in, you knew I was a snake.
This is perhaps the last game the Raiders will ever play in Oakland. Leading 16-3, it looked like they would send their loyal fans off on a high note. Then, Gardner Minshew happened. The Jags scored 2 late touchdowns, and the last play in the Coliseum was a failed Hail Mary. The Raiders' last decade and a half in Oakland was a comedy of errors, and this was just the last straw. But why was this the end? Why did the Raiders have to pack up and leave? Why did the Raiders fail in Oakland? The Oakland Raiders were an original AFL franchise that began its existence in 1960, playing in San Francisco's Kezar Stadium, alongside the 49ers. The Raiders won just 9 games in their first 3 years, and then they hired this guy, Al Davis. Before he was the owner and a team executive, Al Davis was just the Raiders head coach. Raiders moved into their new Coliseum in 1966. They entered an era littered with a larger-than-life head coach named John Madden, and a roster of stars and Hall of Famers, culminating in 2 Super Bowl victories in 1976 and 1980. The same year they won their second Super Bowl, Al Davis, now the team's owner, attempted unsuccessfully to move the team to Los Angeles. It would take 2 more years before he could move the team to LA, but Davis relocated in spite of a lengthy legal battle and a ton of pushback from Commissioner Pete Rozelle, whom Davis fought with during the AFL-NFL merger. Davis wanted to move to Los Angeles for a simple reason: to build the Raiders brand. Davis didn't want his team to be known as the Oakland Raiders or the Los Angeles Raiders or any other city for that matter. He wanted his team to be the Raiders, a global singular brand not tied to any certain locale. I mean, just why not call them the frickin' Raiders? Singular or not, they had to play somewhere, so it only made sense to move to the second biggest market in the country. Davis and the Raiders won another Super Bowl immediately after their move to the LA Coliseum, but Al could never wrestle a piece of land big enough to build a new stadium. Davis's thirst for branding was never satiated without a new stadium in Los Angeles. The team could no longer sell out games, and Al Davis claimed that the lack of fans cost his team 4 to 6 points per game. What the fuck? Seriously blaming the fans for lack of scoring output? In 1995, both the Raiders and the Rams left Los Angeles. Davis originally tried to move the team to Sacramento in a deal that would have made him owner of the Kings as well as the Raiders, but the proposed move fell apart, and in a case of deja vu, Davis resettled in Oakland, in the Oakland Coliseum, and so the autumn wind returned home. The relationship between Davis and the city of Oakland was rekindled when the city offered to house the Raiders following the 1994 Northridge earthquake. But it didn't take long before Davis and the city of Oakland started beefing. The Oakland Coliseum sued the Raiders over their lack of naming rights on the stadium, and Davis countersued them right back. The two sides had trouble cooperating, a big reason they would never build a publicly funded stadium in the Bay Area. And even though they were in Oakland, Davis still wanted exclusive TV rights in Los Angeles, meaning every one of their games would be broadcast in that market ahead of much closer teams like the San Diego Chargers. He kind of had a case since there was no team in LA, but to have broadcasting rights in a market he wasn't even present in was kind of absurd. He still sued the NFL and fittingly lost. In fact, there was a lot of losing that went down during that second stint in Oakland, save for a few blips of success. The Raiders were hot in the early 2000s, riding MVP Rich Gannon to a Super Bowl appearance in 2002, but that was the official end to their glory days under Al Davis. Davis watched as John Gruden, the coach he traded away, hoisted a Lombardi as the Raiders slinked off the field. Davis had always made some questionable decisions, like the long-term benching of Marcus Allen, but brilliance was quickly turned into football insanity. He prioritized speed above all else, meddled in play calling, and thought it was a good idea to draft Jamarcus Russell. He also hired Lane Kiffin. For 7 years in a row, from 2003 to 2007, the Raiders lost double-digit games. Even their stadium was a complete fail. Davis added a 20,000-seat upper deck in 1995 to the Oakland Coliseum, fittingly named Mount Davis, making it the ugliest and oddest configuration in both the NFL and the MLB, providing a bizarre backdrop for the team's failures. The Raiders' swagger eroded and was replaced by an ever-present feeling of shame. The team was now as bad as Al Davis looked, and that's pretty bad. The Raiders found brief competence, and Al Davis passed away in 2011, knowing that the franchise had made it through its darkest days. Or had they? Enter the son, Mark Davis. He of the worst haircut known to man. He of permanent residence at P.F. Chang's, though P.F. Chang's is kind of fire. Mark Davis and his mother inherited the team after his father's death and immediately had a plan. He was going to get the Raiders the hell out of Oakland Coliseum by any means. By 2015, Davis was in communication with city reps from Los Angeles, San Antonio, and Las Vegas. Davis attempted to link up with the Chargers and build a shared stadium in Carson, but Stan Kroenke and the Rams stepped in and politely nudged the Raiders out of the LA market. And even though he was talking to other cities, Davis was still trying to mend fences in Oakland. Attendance was down at the dilapidated Coliseum. The upper levels had to be tarped off, and the stands were a hotbed for world star hip-hop videos. In 2013, Davis proposed a 56,000-seat stadium in the East Bay that would have cost an estimated $800 million. Now, there is a little something you need to understand. Davis is not a billionaire. He's worth only about $500 million, which is the lowest net worth among NFL owners. So when Davis said that he needed funding from the city to build a stadium, he actually meant it, unlike most owners who just do it because some cities are willing enough to do it. The city of Oakland was not so receptive. In 2015, Oakland Mayor Libby Schaaf said she cannot support spending a dime of public funds for a new stadium. According to her, the city didn't have a few $100 million lying around. I mean, it is Oakland we're talking about here. But as Davis and the city kept drifting further apart, something crazy happened. The team started winning. The 2014 Raiders were a complete dumpster fire, but the 2015 Raiders found their footing with 7 wins. In 2016, under head coach Jack Del Rio and third-year quarterback Derek Carr, Oakland won 12 games and earned a spot in the playoffs for the first time since they lost the Super Bowl in 2003. It might not be a coincidence that following that 12-4 season, the city of Oakland scrambled and found $600 million between the couch cushions, most of which came from private investors. By then, it was too late. Las Vegas had put together a package that included $750 million, fully taxpayer funded, to build a structure that would become Allegiant Stadium, which ironically was one of the failed stadium designs for LA. The move by Las Vegas was pretty genius too. Rather than putting the burden entirely on the Nevada residents, state lawmakers increased the hotel tax by 0.88%, meaning out-of-towners would be the ones footing most of the bill. I mean, if you're dumb enough to play the slots in Vegas, you should pay for the Raiders to be there too. In early 2017, the move to Las Vegas was finalized. And then the Raiders played 3 more awkward seasons in Oakland. There was a false send-off in 2018 when the Raiders believed they would be able to play one season in either San Francisco's Oracle Park, Santa Clara's Levi's Stadium, or UNLV's Sam Boyd Stadium, which was somehow even more unfit for pro football than the Oakland Coliseum. Eventually, they came back for one go-round in Alameda, and their new send-off featured a crippling loss to the Jaguars that dashed away any hopes of making the playoffs. The Raiders left Oakland not with a bang, but with a sad whimper. The Raiders' failure in Oakland came down to 2 major factors. The first involves the legacy of Al Davis and the idea that the Raiders were more of a global brand than an Oakland one. Michael Rosenberg of Sports Illustrated wrote that the Raiders are the rare sports team that can honestly say leaving a city is not a betrayal of its brand, but an affirmation of it. They have been willing to pack up and go for almost 4 decades. Like their namesake, the Raiders are nomads at heart, and it's in their nature to keep moving. The second factor was, of course, the Coliseum, a 5.5-decade-old eyesore of concrete known for its tarped-off sections and massive sewage backups that would spill into the opponent's lockers. Oakland was unwilling to play ball until it was too late, when they were beaten to the punch by a city that's become increasingly hungry for professional sports in the last half-decade. The Raiders' brand persists in their new home. The team and the league have forgotten Oakland, a city that has nearly lost pro sports altogether when the Warriors moved across the bridge to San Francisco. And now they are barely hanging on to the Athletics, who, like the Raiders, have been flirting with a move to Vegas. The autumn wind no longer blows in Oakland.
Way slips, time for Carr, sends it skyward to the end zone, and broken up. That's it. Come from behind win for the Jacksonville Jaguars.